Support for this NPR podcast and the following message come from Betterment, a full-service 401k provider. Help attract and retain talent by helping your employees save for retirement and more. No business is too small to get started. Learn more at betterment.com/401k.
This is 1A. I'm Jen White in Washington.
Don't make me smash your melon up. Try throwing a shade of melanin. Bonafido, I'm 7 Up. You're too sweet, I put the lemon in. They put their boots on our ground. I'll put my roots in their ground. I'll put my truth in the sound. I'll spit my truth in his brown. I don't give a about the cash you stack with the crown on your skull. You ain't Basquiat or the Prince of Denmark. Says Eddie Boy pick on their benchmarks. To white kids wanna be packs. Brown planet is gonna be that. The man frown, panic, and wanted me out, but I'm out. Standing cause I stand out. And where I was standing is gonna be cracks.
That's actor and rapper Riz Ahmed in his latest film, Mogul Mowgli. Riz stars as Zed, a rapper diagnosed with an autoimmune disease right before he's set to go on a major tour. Earlier this year, Ahmed was nominated for an Academy Award for his work in The Sound of Metal, another film about a musician dealing with a life-altering medical condition. But Mogul Mowgli is arguably darker and weirder. The film uses rap, lyricism, and magical realism to tell the story of a man navigating identity, family, and illness. Ahmed co-wrote the film and drew on elements from his own life, including his music career as rapper Riz MC and one half of the hip-hop duo Sweatshop Boys. Riz Ahmed joins us now. Riz, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So the main character in Mogul Mowgli is Zed. He's a British Pakistani rapper. He's Muslim. His music includes a lot of social commentary. What was it like playing a character who shares so many elements with your own life?
I mean, it was very much deliberate. You know, Bassam Tariq, who co-wrote the film with me and also directed the film, did such a brilliant job of both, really pushed me and pushed us both really to draw from our own lives. You know, we'd found as either a director or an actor who doesn't necessarily fit the traditional mold that we'd had to become very adept at being everyone other than ourselves. And actually the one kind of character you don't see on screen, the one kind of story you don't see on screen is actually ours. So we drew very directly from our own lives, partly as this kind of exercise of seeing, how far we were willing to go and how kind of honest we were willing to be about things.
You started rapping when you were quite young. What drew you to rap music?
I think it was, like so many people, a blueprint to self-expression and dignity for the outsider. And I felt very much like an outsider growing up, in any context that I was in. So I was kind of found myself code switching between, a working class Pakistani kind of neighborhood and community to a white middle class, upper class, I should say, private school, and then kind of skipping class to go and hang out with my friends from my neighborhood. In that kind of hybrid British Asian culture, and often kind of, it was a bit rougher around the edges. So that kind of outsider status, that kind of search for who I was, really led me to hip hop. Where you have such a kind of unapologetic self-expression. And in expressing yourself, I think you sometimes find out who you are in the process. And so it was that for me. Also on some level, I was just a very hyperactive kid. I was always kind of a bit of a talker. I couldn't shut up in the classroom and at home. And just listening to rappers like DOC or Big Pun and some of these faster rappers, it was just a place to put so much of that energy.
Well, the film intersperses magical realism, and we see a lot of you performing. But it made me wonder about these different mediums of storytelling, acting and rapping, and how those different expressions of storytelling are different for you.
Well, it's interesting because I think for a lot of my life, I very deliberately tried to silo them off into different boxes. I wanted my acting to stand on its own feet and my music to stand on its own feet. But I think part of the exercise of making this film, and as you said, it bridges a lot of tones. It has musical elements, horror elements, magical realism. It's got a comedy vibe. It's a family drama. It's a historical drama. It's got so much in it. We wanted to kind of make a film that is as hyphenated and multifaceted as the identities that it's exploring. We wanted to kind of make this kind of mongrel movie, this mongrel manifesto that celebrates our own kind of mongrelhood in a way, as kind of these Frankensteins that we are between different cultures and times and places and different versions of ourselves. So I would say that the way that rap and film have influenced each other in my own creative process has been intimate, but often I felt like I've had to leave the rapper at the door when I enter the film set, and I leave the actor at the door when I go on stage to rap. And I think part of the exercise of this film for me, and also the story for the character Zed, is finally braiding together all those different threads that make up your identity. And you know what? The tapestry it weaves can be messy and it can be hard to look at and it can be scary, but at some point it's something you have to do.
We're talking to actor Riz Ahmed about his latest movie, Mogul Mowgli. We'll be back with more from Riz in just a moment.
Support for NPR and the following message come from American Express. Need a pick-me-up? Book special events and dining experiences through Resy with Amex. Terms apply. Visit americanexpress.com/withAmex. This message comes from Capital One. With the Capital One Venture Card, you earn unlimited double miles on every purchase every day. And you can use those miles toward travel expenses like flights, hotels, rental cars, and more. Just book and pay for your travel using your Venture Card and redeem your miles toward the cost. Capital One. What's in your wallet? Credit approval required. Capital One Bank, USA, N.A.
Over this last year and a half, the world's been through a lot. So on this season of the StoryCorps podcast, we'll hear stories reminding us that even when times are hard, we can still begin again. Listen to our new season wherever you get your podcasts.
Let's dive back into the conversation with actor Riz Ahmed about his latest movie, Mogul Mowgli. Music really does serve as a backbone for the film. How are you thinking about that integration, how music serves as that backbone for the story?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of provided us with another gear. I was personally, against the idea of making Zed a rapper. I thought you could make him, with kind of really doing this portrait of the artist as a brown man or whatever, working class POC, artist who, like it or not, is kind of, has to carry this burden of representation. And sometimes he leans into it, sometimes he leans away from it. It's about this push and pull between you and where you're from. I said, does he have to be a rapper? Mm-hmm. Can we not make him anything else? And I think Bassam realized that it would give us a different kind of, tone that we could explore, that we could go to a heightened place, that we could go to a place of confession, of breaking the fourth wall, that we could, explore kind of stuff rhythmically in terms of cutting, that could be really interesting. If you've got a movie where for a large part of the film, the protagonist is kind of confined in bed, then having the kind of momentum of music to cut to and propel the film is very useful. So as a storytelling tool, I thought it ended up being really invaluable.
Well, our main character, Zed, prides himself on the social commentary he makes through his music. And there's a point in the film where someone calls him out.
This is the problem with you Pakis.
What?
You get a bit of fame and you turn into fucking coconuts.
What? What the you call me?
Coconut.
How the about I ain't coconut, man. Yo, you know me. Bro, have you heard any of my lyrics?
I heard your lyrics.
Yeah, I guess a kind of an analogous term in America would be an Oreo. I've heard Asian Americans talk about being called a banana or whatever. In the UK, if you're brown on the outside, white on the inside, or if that's how someone assesses you to be, then you can get called a coconut. And I guess, like I said, so much of this film is very specific and it's drawn so much from our lives. But at its heart is, I think, something that so many people can relate to, which is that tug of war between you and where you're from. And it's particularly galling if the place where you're from has inspired your work, it has allowed you to pursue your creative dreams in a way. And yet at the same time, the place where you're from has been your biggest obstacle to overcome in order to pursue those dreams. And to some extent, you want to pursue those dreams and that creative ambition because it's an exit route from that place where you're from. So there's that constant push and pull. And so for someone like Zed, who says, he's out there representing his people. And, earlier in the film, his girlfriend says to him, for someone who's always talking about representing where you're from, when was the last time you went and visited there? To what extent have you kind of commodified your identity, commodified your trauma without actually sitting with it, without actually facing it, without actually, you get so busy, representing who you are, that you're often unable to just be present, with yourself and with where you're from.
Zed is adamant about a certain presentation of authenticity. And when he's with his family, it felt to me as if he was really struggling to maintain a certain type of identity in those very intimate familial spaces. But it wasn't always clear exactly what line he was trying to hold. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. And isn't there something, again, I think something that in a less heady way that we can all relate to is going back to visit our parents and suddenly becoming teenagers. Right? Suddenly the facade is stripped bare and the inner child comes out. And suddenly all these kind of neat boxes that you've put different parts of your life, or this narrative that you've told yourself, told the world about who you are. As I said, particularly if you become, whether you like it or not, a representative, then actually then that facade, that role can be a place of refuge. But when you come home, you can't hide in that place anymore. You're going to get flushed out. That's the joy and the pain of family, of the place where you are from, of the source. This theme, as I said, this kind of tug of war between you and your roots is throughout the film, and it manifests through Zed and his father, that father-son relationship. It manifests through him and his relationship with his cousins, with his community, with his cultural inheritance through Qawwali music, which he pushes away, and then he kind of finds a seed of inspiration in later on, and also ultimately with himself, his very DNA, his gene code is he's at war with himself on a molecular level. And so that struggle is kind of really present throughout the entire film, and in a way it's what it's about.
Well, another struggle we see Zed grappling with is about his music. It touches on this through the character of RPG, a rapper Zed is not a fan of, to say the least. How would you describe what RPG represents in the film?
I mean, first and foremost, I'd say RPG is the genius creation of Naban Rizwan, who's an incredible young actor. He was in 1917. He fronted a TV series called Informer on the BBC, which I think is also available in the States. And I urge people to check him out. He's incredible. He's also a rapper. And it's interesting, in casting Naban Rizwan, I mean, he even shared his last name as my first name. I remember when I first saw his work, I had this kind of I just was so yes, amazing. There's this, at times it can be so lonely being the only one in the room, and it's this kid's out, he's doing this thing. But then I had this other second darker thought, which is one day I'll be I'm not the new guy anymore. And I said to Buenta Bassam, and I said, we've got to cast Naban Rizwan as RPG. And I guess it's this idea, this fear of being replaced, this fear of, what an artist on some level is looking for is immortality, for the legacy of their work to outlive and outlast them. And yet, in a weird way, if you're kind of, again, whether you like it or not, kind of thrust into the position of having to be a pioneer, or like one of the first or few people of your type to be in a field, you're kind of working you're working for the end of your specialness. You're working for the end of your uniqueness. As an activist, you're kind of working towards your own irrelevance, hopefully. You know what I mean? So it's kind of interesting that there's this kid who's inspired by Zed, and he takes up his mantle and he's doing things his own way. And actually the kind of ego is laid bare. Like, how much of this is some, how much are you actually saving your community or people or representing them? How much of this is just ego and a weird messianic complex? And he, it's a jolt to Zed encountering RPG, encountering the reality of his finite shelf life. When I talk about that push and pull at the heart of the film, part of it is about the push and pull between being an individual or being part of a larger whole. And I guess one of the lessons Zed's learning on this journey is you are a link in a chain, whether you like it or not. And there's something incredibly beautiful about that and incredibly claustrophobic about that. And whether you like it or not, the Qawwali music is the seed of what you do now as a rapper. And what you do now as a rapper, you're handing the relay, that you're passing the baton on in the relay race to the next generation. So I guess, it's that idea of transmission of culture.
But there's also this push and pull around realness or authenticity, and who gets to say what's authentic. Zed is at one point accused of not being a real Muslim or a real Pakistani. Zed accuses RPG of not being a real rapper. There's a point in the film when we see this rap battle where a black rapper accuses Zed of cultural appropriation. I mean, so there's this other tension at play around this question of realness. Were you actively trying to explore that in the film, or is that something that just emerged on its own?
I think it's a really organic byproduct, to be honest, of trying to make a really honest film, of trying to make a film as honestly as possible, and it draws in as real and authentic as way as possible from our own experience. I think that's one thing. I always believe that the process of making or writing or creating something mirrors the thing that is created. I'm a big believer in process first, and at the end, when it's all said and done, it's the process that shows in something, I believe. But I also think that there's, if you're a working class creative of color, then the thing that you have is your realness, is your authenticity, and you are forced, whether you like it or not, to commodify that, to trade on that, to trade on your trauma, or to, commodify your culture. It comes with the territory, and there's ways in which you can subvert that transaction. You can make it work for you, but there's also there's a price tag on it. It's like the currency that you're dealing in. When you're trying to earn a living and build a career as a working class creative of color, or any kind of outsider to that creative field, how do you kind of stay in touch with that realness, that authenticity that gives you that edge, that freshness that allows you to tell stories that aren't being told? And how do you not let the telling of it rob you of that authenticity? How, in the moment of transmitting that story, do you not dilute the very authenticity that you've been drawing from? I guess there's different versions of this quote that I've read, which is like, as a writer, you're always selling someone out. And whenever there's a version of that as an artist who's kind of both eager to, but also forced to tell stories from, the hinterland.
We'll be back with more from Riz in just a moment.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Samsung with the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 3 5G. Enjoy the freedom to capture from any angle with Flex Mode. Make hands-free video calls and take photos by simply unfolding your Galaxy Z Flip 3 5G. Choose what you want to capture, set it down, stand back, and shoot your best shot. And with Flex Mode, play back your next viral video on the top screen, while your bottom screen gives you pro editing control. 5G connection and availability may vary. Check with carrier.
Support for NPR and the following message come from BetterHelp, offering online counseling. BetterHelp therapist Hesu Joe knows that lockdown has been hard on us as humans.
We as people are hardwired to connect with others, which is why this whole time is so difficult.
Let's jump back into the conversation with actor Riz Ahmed. As Zed's autoimmune disease continues to progress, the magical realism in the film becomes more present. And there's a lot of blending of Zed's experiences and his father's memories, and it's hard to tell where one starts and where another ends in the film. Mm-hmm. What were you exploring about how parental memory shapes a child's identity, even if that memory isn't discussed?
Well, in terms of that kind of magical realist or surrealist kind of style of storytelling, that's a real trademark of Bassam Tariq, who's such an exciting new voice. He's next directing Blade with Mahershala Ali, and his short documentary Ghosts of Sugarland also plays with this kind of bridging the surreal and incredibly hard-hitting tones. But we were really eager to find a cinematic language that contains the truth of our experience. And our experience is one that's infused with spirituality and myth and legend. And, magical realism is a redundant term if your reality is infused every day with magic, both positive and negative. When you live in a world where the evil eye or, the protection from Nazar and, God's favors bestowed or taken away is just like part of how you assess reality. So that's kind of to speak to the tone. With regards to ancestral trauma, that was definitely a big part of, I guess this key theme we were exploring. That dance between you and where you're from. Has both fed you and given you your start, giving you your inspiration, but also is at risk of sucking you back into that starting point, sucking you back into the pain that gave you inspiration. And it's an interesting field, with ancestral trauma and epigenetics. It's one that's really growing, and we decided to kind of portray this ancestral trauma of partition through an autoimmune disorder. So partition is, the division of India and Pakistan in 1947. Millions of people died, largest forced migration in history. It's something that actually our elders often don't talk about. Something that's hidden from, history in many ways. In many parts of the world, people aren't really aware of this cataclysmic thing that happened when the world was split in two. And that trauma is kind of something that we explore, and it's handed on. I don't want to say too much. I want to let people see the film in the form of this autoimmune condition, which itself is fascinating because it turns out people of color who live in diaspora are far more likely to suffer from autoimmune conditions. And what is autoimmunity if it's not your body's failure to recognize itself? It's almost an identity crisis played out on a molecular level.
Throughout the film, we hear Zed, see Zed in almost constant conversation, either with himself or with the divine, rapping. His lips are moving. It's this constant thing that's happening. We see something very similar with his father, but it happens through prayer.
Yeah.
Where do those connect for you?
Well, I think, you've laid it out. And it's interesting, like the Bible or the Quran or the Torah, you don't talk about lines or paragraphs, you talk about verses. This is poetry. This is the most powerful poetry in human history. It's changed the way we see the world, the way we relate, our societies, our values. And it's interesting because in the same way that Zed starts off thinking, well, these qawwali singers, there's this kind of Pakistani gospel jazz music, these qawwali singers are, they have nothing to do with me. And then you kind of later realize, actually, I'm the inheritor of their legacy. In that same way, religion and religiosity and spirituality is something that he thinks has, he's kind of pushed that to one side. It might be part of where he's from, but it's not part of his day-to-day right now. And yet, those dots end up joining themselves, and he realizes that actually, whether his mom and dad are reciting verses, and so is he. And it's something I talk about a little bit on the track we made for the film, Once Kings. It's like, can the right verse that I write or that my mom recites get me back to my feet, make the pain end? This idea of invocation and the power of language is something that's really deeply rooted in our culture, and most cultures really. And often we just don't join the dots when that the parallels are so clear.
You talked about the push to bring yourself to this film. Did you learn or start to think about your own story, your family story, any differently on the other side of this project?
It's interesting. I started digging around a bit around my family's, ancestry and stories around partition. A few years prior to that, actually, when I did Reluctant Fundamentalists with Mira Nair, and I shot that film, with a group of Indian and Pakistani actors who, because they hadn't gone through the dislocation of migration, had a very clear idea of who they were and who their families were generations and generations back. And I felt jealous, and I felt like I needed to know. And to some extent, in that environment, you do need to know. People ask you straight up, like, who is your father? Who's your granddad? Where were you guys from originally? That where you from question really matters in certain parts of the world. And so I started kind of asking questions and sniffing around a little bit. And in a way, it's taken all those years to kind of turn that into story, to turn, some of those, bring some of those stories to screen.
That's actor and rapper Riz Ahmed. He joined us to talk about his latest film, Mogul Mowgli. Riz, thanks for speaking with us.
So much in.
Today's producers were Arfi Getty and Paige Osborne. Our podcast is produced by Barb Anguiano. This program comes to you from WAMU, part of American University in Washington, distributed by NPR. I'm Jen White. Thanks for listening, and let's talk more soon. This is 1A.
This message comes from NPR sponsor 3M, committed to protecting healthcare workers globally. Learn more at 3m.com/improving lives. 3M Science, applied to life.